We have 4 panelists and moderator. Jonathan Jubera is from OHSU, Oregon Clinical and Translational Research Institute there. And he works with early stage biomedical innovators every day. And so he has brought some speakers to us and will lead them through a series of questions over the next 45 minutes or so before our breakouts. So let me take down these slides and we'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Thanks so much, Terry. I'm really happy to be here. And I think I brought some really interesting folks from not only OHSU, but our community. And because of COVID, our community has expanded to the East Coast apparently, because Turner Baker from Mount Sinai is here. So I was hoping maybe just quickly, as Terry mentioned, I manage a grant program here at OHSU called the Biomedical Innovation Program. It's very commercialization focused, so we give a small amount of money, but provide project management, mentorship, and entrepreneur education to help folks move their technologies into the marketplace. And I would like to introduce one of our awardees, Dr. Kim Hutchison. And Kim, if you could introduce yourself and just give maybe a 30-second spiel about what you're working on, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So I'm a sleep medicine physician and a neurologist, and I came up with a device that eliminates mouth breathing to help patients be more successful with their CPAPs for treatment of sleep apnea. And it's something that I witnessed being a problem for patients for nearly, at least over a decade, like on almost a daily basis. And so I got the BIP award, and that was kind of what really started the ball rolling. And I just launched the product this past January, and it was 4 years later. So it's been a lot of learning as well as COVID in the middle there.
Thanks, Dr. Hutchison. Turner Baker, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so happy to be here. My name's Turner Baker. I'm an assistant professor in neurosurgery here at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, so still have some PNW connections. I'm the associate director of Sinai Biodesign. We're the medtech incubator and innovator from within the Mount Sinai Health System. So we help surgeons and clinicians take their ideas, turn it into CAD drawings and new prototypes, eventually get patents and IP, and then we either help them license it to big industry, or we spin it out as a startup and then help them kind of launch that. And then we also partner with big industry with products already in their portfolio and help them kind of improve it or improve adoption or run clinical trials. So kind of run the whole breadth of those things.
Thanks, Turner. Dr. Wasana Yantasi, please.
Hi, my name is Vasana Yantasi. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering at OSU, and I'm also a founder, CEO of PDX Pharmaceuticals. We're developing a nanoparticle platform for many class of therapeutics delivery to cancer. So our first drug candidate is going to be cancer immunotherapy that we are trying to take it to clinical trial, and mainly we've been funded by the NIH.
Thanks, Wasana. And then Kabir Bhatia.
Thanks, Jonathan. If you guys are playing the game of who's the odd one out, that would be me, because I'm not a professor at a research institution. So my background's a little bit different. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, got a master's in material science and mechanical engineering. I spent about 20 years across different disciplines, including being a scientist, but then also being an investment banker and being in corporate finance. Over the last couple of years, over the last 3 years or so, I've been the CEO of a couple of different companies. One that came out of OHSU called Oxetics, and then the other, which is where I'm now, called Stone Stable, that came out of Portland State, and been trying to help the biotech ecosystem out here in the Oregon region. So good to be with you.
I think for me, it got, as a physician scientist, you're always learning and you're growing and you're challenging yourself. And it takes a long time to get good and comfortable with medicine. And you spend, 30, 40 years getting there. And then once you're there, once I was doing it and finally got comfortable, after a few years, it was like, okay, like what's next? And if your mind wants to continue down that path of learning and growth and doing something new, then you start thinking of new ways that you can make an even bigger difference in the field.
Wasana, how about you?
my was simpler than Kim. Mine is back then, when we already have the technology that we believe that it can be commercialized, but try to get the funding to traditional grant like an R1 is actually very lengthy process. So we pursue a grant that calls Small Business Innovative Research, which is SBIR, and that's it much faster when they review it like 3 times a year, and the budget size fairly big. For us, for cancer drug development, it's fairly expensive. So we go after the SBIR. That's why we start the company. But in terms of spirit, I'm interested in entrepreneurship from the beginning because I also got an MBA along with my PhD. So and also I got a team that could help me get started in terms of start a company, because academic people to try to start a company and run the company actually can be time consuming. So I have a PhD student in my lab that just graduated. So he served as a principal investigator for my company. So
it's all about the clinical need. I think when it comes down to it, if you're not filling a need that exists, then it's just never going to work, right? And needs can be broken down, I think, in a lot of different ways, right? But I think the main two is if there's a real clinical need, like, is it actually going to improve patient care or physician workflow? And then the other one is if there's a real market need, right? There has to be enough of a market push to make it viable, especially in like the startup entrepreneurial space, right? Like just having a small change idea is just not going to be enough to, like Wasana said, raise money. It is such a huge threshold you have to meet, right? So you have to make sure that the market you're going after is going to be worthwhile. And then, so that means that the change that you're inducing has to be enough of a change that it meets that mark. So I think those two are really what we look for as an incubator. And
at some point, somebody's got to pay to use this technology. That's sort of the fundamental of why we're starting companies, is to make money for investors, for the founders, etc. And at some point, that's going to be the customer. We tend to use customers become a really important point. Turner hit on a bunch of really important points. But it's hard for early stage biotechs to find customer data points, right? It's a vision. It's going to take substantial hurdles to get past. But at the same time, I think it's really important to make sure that you're hitting sort of where your best estimation of what the market is going to look like when you've hit all those hurdles. And that's what investors tend to look for. That's what companies tend to look for is, hey, are you going to, when this drug or when this device is going to be ready, is it going to be able to take on a significant enough market share that it's going to make all those people that back the company during those years, is it going to make their while? And so that doing that customer discovery is paramount. We take it one step further when we engage with a company. We actually go and talk to some strategics. And one of the things that we find is that it's just so important for us to understand sort of how they think about that space. And also, what would it take for them to acquire this company if this came up? Do they want to acquire it once it's fully FDA approved? Will they acquire it prior to a phase 3? What does that look like? And what are some of the tests that they look like? There's so many different ways to sort of map out a product and what the path looks like. But it becomes really important for you to have a clear rationale for why you're doing it. and that can be, that strategic conversation can be really important, both in terms of what it's going to take for a partnership or for an investment, but it's also important validation from a customer perspective, particularly for investors. So,
Wasana, could you talk about how you sort of validated your idea that meaning you have the right, you're trying to solve the right problem, or you have the right solution for the problem you're trying to solve.
So when we first started, we the field was really excited about siRNA, because it can knock down any gene of interest, and some of the genes that are not dockable by small molecule inhibitor or antibody, you can knock it down with siRNA, and that have a lot of application, especially in cancer. But back then, there's not a lot of, many people try and they're not successful at delivering siRNA to solid tumor. And we developed this nanoparticle. We show that we can knock down siRNA in solid tumor very well. That's how we get started. But then over the year, we know that the platform can also do other therapeutics, not just siRNA.
Kim, can you talk a little bit about your customer discovery, your experience with customer discovery, and was there a point where you learned, either validated your assumptions or learned that you needed to go in a different direction, perhaps?
I think that I knew that this was a real problem because I was a clinician. I am still a clinician. So I was seeing this issue, but I think that one thing that was helpful is that I did talk to some people in industry that work in sleep medicine, and I asked them about, solving it, and they weren't interested in solving it because it actually wasn't the way that they solved it, which doesn't work, by the way, makes them more money. So I realized at that point that this issue wasn't going to be solved unless it sort of came from the inside out. And that was very validating in moving forward. And then I guess I'll say that there are times when you feel very secure in that validation and everything seems to be going along just swimmingly. And then there are times where you're completely questioning yourself and what am I thinking? And, it doesn't, you get kind of in the weeds and it's hard to remember, what you were doing. And is this really going to have the big impact that I was thinking it was? And then you'll have, I just went to a sleep medicine meeting to promote my product. And finally, after 4 years, I was around a lot of other people just like me, and they were so encouraging and so happy to see this. And, that was the first time in 4 years that I felt like, okay, no, yes, this does really matter. This is worth, continuing on this path, because the investors and the business world, they're just looking at numbers and assumptions, and those things matter for sure, but it's not, they don't really understand what you're talking about. They don't know that your problem is a problem. And so in having those conversations for years, you kind of start to lose touch with that a little bit as well. And so reconnecting with some of the people that benefit from it along the way is something that I have found very helpful.
Can anybody talk about just any of the tools or that folks can use and implement for customer discovery?
Blood, sweat, and tears, I think, are the main ones. Blood, sweat, and tears. You just got to grind it,
can you use surveys, or is it more, it's always, I think, preferred to do it in person, but that can be challenging sometimes. How do you feel about that?
I think it also depends on whether this is a consumer product or whether you're marketing it to physicians, etc. Right? So consumer products much more, I think, able to manage with a survey. When you're dealing with physicians, there's just a lot of nuance, and so you just have to balance that.
I think, like, kind of hand in hand with customer discovery is doing a competitive landscape review and market analysis. There's some very expensive databases that you can access, but I'm wondering what you would recommend to people, or what either of our university folks have used to try to research the market.
Mhm.
I find going to a conference is really helpful to get a view of the landscape. It's a one-stop way to sort of at least understand size and attribute, and just being able to speak to a competitive analysis slide is really helpful, and that color becomes really helpful. And so if you can attend a conference or two, that does 80% of the job for you in terms of who are real players.
So you're trying to drill down and get some numbers for your commercialization plan for your SBIR phase 2. Where are you getting that information? Is Google sufficient? Or what are some of the resources people? So
I think there's top-down approaches, which I think are generally bogus, right? Which is like, here's the whole market, and then you just do some like logical progression to figure out how you could slice it up. Like, sure, these, a lot of those are not well validated. I like bottom up better, right? I think if you're in an academic institution, you can get access to snippets of this data, right? There'll be publications on the areas that you're going to target, right? And so you can say, like, this is how many are in the zone, right? You can also go and actually look at raw data that's existing in your academic group. I think there's lots of value to that in med tech and biotech, right? You partner with them, you say, we want to do research, we want to help some PI unlock and really say, like, how many of these are happening in this region, right? And then you can extrapolate rationally from there with actual numbers. I think that has multiple values. You value by learning more about your market, and you also start to look a little bit more like an expert in this field that you're going to be trying to build tech and raise money in, right? So doing stuff like that, I think, is always valuable. But part of the problem that you'll run into if you're truly being innovative is that the market as it is not necessarily always how it's going to be, right? Especially with your technology entering in the fray. Like, I don't know everything about Kim's tech, right? But she was saying that people are not using similar technology, or might not be wanting to, because something else is happening, right? So if you just looked at who's prescribing something like that currently, that market is artificially small, right? So you have to figure out how much are you going to grow it. And that's where you start to get into kind of that like woo-woo, hand wavy stuff of how much you're going to grow, which is just what it is. You can't really get away from that. But the important part is that you base something off of like true knowledge, like true data, true research that you yourself have gotten like in the thick of it, right? And if you can get in the thick of it and like turn it into like part of an academic pub that you can then like have some secret parts that you use for when you pitch, like, I think that if you're in an academic setting, you have access to that stuff. You just have to go find it. You have to find the people that have it, that want to share with you. And, I-Corps is a great chance to start that,
Kim, I wanted to ask you, since this talk is, unique challenges of biomedical entrepreneurship. I mean, one of those, I think, unique challenges is the regulatory path and the FDA. And I think you have a pretty unique perspective on that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you started and where you ended?
Sure. So it's very challenging. As a scientist trying to navigate the regulatory landscape, I had people like early on, people through the BIP program and OHSU talking with me about different regulatory pathways. But because you don't fully understand how your product is going to evolve over time when you're starting out, you don't even really know what questions to talk to them about. So they give you feedback based on what you're telling them, and then you're incorporating that information to guide you, but then things change. And then I was looking at, doing like a regulatory path 510K pathway for like a class 2 device to work with like a CPAP machine. But part of that advice that I was getting was because I was in an academic setting, and it was, people just assumed that like my device was actually like treating sleep apnea, but it's not actually treating sleep apnea. And when I kind of moved away from the university a little bit and got some like outside counsel, and then it was like, well, you know, it became clear that like my product's not actually treating anything. Like the technology can be a consumer product as an accessory to like a CPAP machine, for example, but it can also be a standalone product. And that in itself like made a big difference, because if you are associating with a, say, class 2 regulatory device, and that's the only thing it can be used for, then you have to also get that sort of registry. But if you are going to do a consumer product, then, and it can stand alone and you're not actually treating something, you can actually bypass the FDA altogether. So that's kind of the pathway that I went. Then I talked to someone who was like, oh no, you definitely do. Like even a toothbrush has to be registered, you know, and then I'm freaking out again, and I'm spending, you know, a couple weeks thinking, do I have to shut down my whole operation here? And then I talked to another regulatory person, and they're like, oh no, you can do this consumer. It's all about your claims, you know, and then I get the whole, you know, better understanding around like, you can have like my tech, it can be a non-regulated device for a while, like the way it is now, and I just can't make certain claims. And then the exact same thing can go later, and I can get a class 1 or even class 2 if I need to device, which is only going to impact what I say that the device can do, even though the device hasn't changed, you know, at all. And so it's this sort of, you know, up and down that is part of the day-to-day. One day your head's in the sand, the next day you feel like you're on top of the world, type of path that we're all on here. And so I think more than anything, just looking at this as a learning process. Like if nothing works with my product and it gets shut down or whatever, like this time, I don't want it to be wasted time. Like all these things that I've learned, like 5 years ago, I couldn't have told you the difference between all of these classes and claims and consumer product for FDA pathways, etc. And so now I know. So it's just, you know, you're just absorbing and pivoting and navigating along the way.
It's a great story. It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I obviously am very familiar with what you went through, but it's, you know, I think it's a good example of, yeah, not everything's going to be a medical device or needs to be. And I'm sure, you know, turn around. Have you run into similar any projects at Sinai that you're kind of, that can speak to that at all?
You know, we normally tend more on the medical device side. Another group works more on the wellness devices, but I think what Kim's talking about, you know, in the scope of like an iCore, like it totally kind of affects, like that planning is going to be affected by who you talk to, right? If she was to interview a bunch of like CPAP developers, they'd be like telling her all this horror stories, right? But then you got to go talk to the people who can't sleep well, right? And they're going to be like, well, I just want to buy it, and like it's just going to make my life better, right? And better isn't a clinical outcome, right? You got to put metrics, but now you don't if you're just saying like, look, we think that you'll sleep a little sounder, right? Like, and so I think that who you talk to and who you define as your customer versus your user versus like your purchaser, you know, I've attended iCores and mentored iCore stuff, and I always laugh at like the people that are selling like a widget on your boot or something, because their business canvas is so simple, right? And then you go and look at like med tech or biotech, and it's like so complicated and like the person buying it never even uses it, like the patient isn't even there or something, and you're like, where's the patient? It's so complicated. And so I think that it's so important to make these decisions. And I think like understanding for at least med tech, the classes and what it means, like when you're implanting something versus a class 2, and you got to do kind of like code switching between how you're talking about your technology, right? Because you say to the patent office, it's so innovative, no one's done anything like this, here's why. Then you go to the FDA and you go, oh, no, it's just like everything you've seen before. It's predicated, like you've seen it a million times. Like, don't worry, there's 0 differences. So it's like, how do you juggle both of those? And then to your investors, you're trying to say, I'm saying both of these things, and then they're getting confused. So it's like, it's so tricky. But it's also part of the fun. Like Kim said, I think the learning process is fun. It's like, if you like this kind of stuff, dynamic thinking, like lots of pivots, it's a great time.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if that was specific enough.
No, it's all right. It's good. This is a very informal fireside chat. So, one of the other challenges I think that we kind of bemoan is, it's kind of hard to find CEO level, talent in, in the Portland area and in the, maybe less so in the Seattle area, but I know from talking with colleagues, it can be difficult up there as well. Maybe Kabir, I know you've worked with a lot of companies. Can you speak to, when should folks, who are maybe serving as a CEO, but don't have a lot of experience, but they've, during the early non-dilutive funding process, they've been able to manage the grants and, maybe they've raised up to $1 million. When do folks, really need to start thinking about getting, more experienced folks in their companies? And how do you evaluate that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jonathan. It's one that, we spend a lot of time thinking about who's the right person for the job. I think it depends on what the funding source is. If there's significant grant funding opportunities available, a lot of times the PI being the CEO makes a lot of sense because they're often, really experts at grant writers. They're expert grant writers. And they're great examples of companies that have been funded by NIH or NSF grants for a big chunk of their early tenure. But there are limitations with what companies can be funded by grants and there are limitations to that grants as well. Because some spaces their grants are not as available, or it slows down the progress, or etc. Right? So it depends on the landscape. Where we find it makes a lot more sense to have a CEO from the outside that is not the PI is in situations where the inventor has a full-time job or at least a significant job outside of the company and isn't ready to make the leap and leave a tenured position often, right? So that's one significant situation. But the other significant situation is, they have a significant understanding of the science, but they are not experts in the business of it. And it's gotten to the point where the company really needs to think about how to tackle the market and start to think about the strategic implications of that. All of these things, by the way, I should caution, can be solved with advisors, with consultants, and in 1,500 different ways, right? So none of this is a one-stop shop solution, but I'm talking in sort of broad generalities. That tends to be one sort of catalyst for getting an outside CEO, and it has to be the right person. It's got to be the right fit, and even the CEO that I've been CEO of a couple of companies. I don't expect to be the CEO for the entire duration of the company. And I fully expect that this is going to be a point in time, and at some point the company is going to outgrow me, or I might outgrow the company. Hopefully, it's the former. And then it's time to bring in the right candidate for the next tenure of that company, and I get to cheer from the sidelines as a shareholder. And so it truly depends. One of the things that I think is really important is that the CEO that is in place has the bandwidth to obsess the company and all the elements of it, right? So there's the technical aspects of it, there's the business aspects of it, there's the regulatory aspects of it, there's at some point there will be the shareholder aspects of it, and really thinking about sort of all of the implications of that. And if you're finding that, if the inventor finds that they're not able to do that service, that's a really good sort of point in time to really think about bringing on a partner that can help offload some of it.
Thank you. Terry Butler, I have a question for you. Do you usually at the end open up questions from the audience?
Yeah, maybe we should do that now if you guys are ready. This is awesome. You're covering a broad range of things. So we'll see if anyone has questions. Maybe raise your hands and we can identify you, or put something in the chat and we'll look for your questions.
I thought for one, we were very complete in our answers.
You were, yeah. However, there's a question. I see Elizabeth. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, all of us are academic teams. You know, I help to mentor some teams, and I also am working in the community. I was quite interested in Kim's comment about the advice that you get when you're in an academic incubator, and of which all of you have at some point in time been, and the advice that you get in the community. Where do you go for resources in the community if they're not linked to the academic? Have you got some suggestions? Like the SBIR is one, or NIH is another, but that tends to be a little bit more academic teams.
Exactly. I mean, fortunately, Jonathan and even people within your academic center can connect you with people that are in industry outside of academics. And that viewpoint is very, very helpful. And then they're even particularly helpful because they're used to sort of talking and working with people in academics, so they can sort of bring up things that are like recurrent themes from the mindset that is academia and how that is different once you're out of that in the way that you're thinking. So I think asking people like who they have worked with, like if you know anyone who's been in industry, and then are there people outside that they can refer you to, and then that person, I mean, there's way more people outside of academics than there are.
We forget
inside.
that, right?
Exactly. So you just need to ask a couple of people, and then or if there's like an incubator around, you know, we've got the OBI, and there's a lot of mentors there, and they've been really, there's been some great resources there. So, yeah, just like a few questions, and then that opens up the floodgates.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My company use a lot of consultant too in many types. Like we have manufacturer consultant, toxicology consultant, regulatory consultant. So we all have consultant. They seem to know each other. If you start with one, they seem to, you know, recommend you to someone else. Yeah, but good one, like I said, they're not cheap. They cost between $300 to $500 an hour. So that's part that you have to have budget for, and we've been lucky to have the SBIR to pay for it. You know.
Thanks, Hosanna.
Stacy?
Hi. So firstly, this has been really interesting and useful. I was wondering, one of you mentioned sort of entering the medical ecosystem, how there are so many different stakeholders of, like, there's patients, there's insurance payers, there's, you know, the people who are going to order, in my case, hopefully diagnostic tests. How would you recommend, or in your experience, how have you guys done this, where you know, I'm a completely technical person, but this is such a big and important ecosystem to understand? Like, I guess, what are resources to start learning about exactly how that works and who you should be talking to when?
I wasn't the one that said all of those important people to be thinking about, but I will give you my take on that, which is it's really important to get in a community of people that are also trying to do this and are at different stages than you. So people that are further along, maybe they've used someone, or maybe they have a business attorney or advisor, or they've worked with the pharmaceutical, and so they've done it. You can't recreate the wheel for every little thing that you need done. And it's a really isolating experience to have like one foot on both sides, one foot in as a clinician, one foot trying to do business, and they don't crosstalk very much. And so you are automatically isolated in the work that you're doing. And then if you don't have people around you, so getting involved, and I got involved, it's an online community because there's not that many like physician entrepreneurs out there. Then I can go to any of them now and ask some of these questions. So that's just kind of from like the little everyday workings. As far as like some of the bigger questions, like the payers and who's going to order and how do you get in with them, I would defer to Turner and Kabir.
I was going to add to what you just said, Kim, which is I like to think of an acronym, Stacy, which is ABR, always be recruiting. And you're always recruiting for advisors, for mentors, for people in the community. And I often find that companies recruit their scientific advisory team either way too late, or they're too stagnant or too stale. And so you've got to be thinking about who to bring in and really help advise, be sounding boards, people who will make time, will use their Rolodex to support the company. That's who you want on your advisory team, whether it's a scientific advisory team or a business advisory team.
Yeah, I agree. I think, even combining this with what Jonathan asked earlier, which is like, when do you start like looking and bringing in those serious people? I think when you start finding business advisors and really senior advisors of any type, is like the time to do it is yesterday. Like there's no too early of a time to start talking to these people that like just have all these insights and these vantage points. It's like, it's kind of like the opposite of that Anna Karenina quote, where it's like all successful, startups are probably successful in their own way, and all the failed ones are failing in very similar ways. Like a lot of people can help you diagnose what's going wrong and help you, but you got to figure out like your own unique way. Like what Kim was talking about, getting through the FDA. It's like millions of people have gone through the FDA, but it's unique for every single time you got to do it. And I think when it comes to finding like who are all these stakeholders, it's just cold outreach. It's just grinding it out. It's like, just go to, if you need to figure out reimbursement, just go to the CMS page and just cold outreach to a bunch of people. Like you'll be amazed how many people want to help you. Like people love startups. People love the idea that you're doing something fresh and something new. Like strategics will want to like chat with you and want to learn about it. And I think another thing that I always try to push people in my group to not do is like, there's this notion of like, you don't want to tell anybody because they're going to steal it. But like, realistically, like nobody cares about your stupid little idea. Like, right. Like that's, it's kind of mean maybe to say, but like, it's the truth. Like right now you just got this little like fetal idea that who knows if it's going to do anything, but like, don't worry. Like these big companies are so slow moving. They don't want to buy it until you have money getting in the door. So it's like, tell people, like tell your story. You don't have to tell them all the nitty gritties, but like, get people excited. You should be good at telling the story and getting them excited quickly, and that they can be like, wow, that's cool. Here's some ideas. I've seen this before. Like you'll learn so much. And just chase it down. Like, who do you know? Who do you talk to? Who is that person? What's their name? You just kind of gotta, the grindstone is unfortunately usually the answer. Cold outreach and the grindstone is usually how you get it all done.
Yeah, that's great. We have a question in the chat, which I'm intrigued to see if you guys can provide an answer to. So what is the biggest factor that pushed the needle from a no-go to go, or yet to go, in pursuing your company? I guess taking your idea from just idea to company.
For me, it was that you reach sort of a dead end to where you pretty much have to start a company if you want to take on some outside funding to even like test your idea. So being in academics, OHSU won't let you try it out on like any patient or anything without like a big funding IRB approved study. And they want zero risk, no liability. Anyone that you work with has to have like an exorbitant amount of insurance. So you can't really function very nimbly in that environment. And so if you just want to get some quick answers, like, is this going to work? I need to get it in some people's mouths. Then I had to form a startup so I could get just a little bit of investor funding to actually get to a go, no go for the product. So for me, I wasn't like all that crazy about doing a startup, but I didn't really have a lot of options at that point.
I think it's so unique to each product to decide if it's is it a go, no go? Like, is it gonna work? There's only a few ways that it can fail, right? Like, you're not gonna make any money doing it. Your technology isn't gonna work. It's not gonna get you the outcome you want. Your team is dysfunctional, or someone who's already done it. Like, I mean, I think those are the kind of the main four that are gonna like sink you. Like, can you say all four you're pretty happy, or at least there's enough of a true unknown that, like Kim said, you can take the next step and investigate that and like utilize resources to prove your tech works, or to recruit a better team, or to start to take over the market. Like, I think you got to answer those questions, and it's bespoke for each of your innovations.
Yeah, sometimes it depends on if you can find the people to fund it too, right? Some idea you think is great, you got good data, you believe it's great, but you couldn't find someone to fund it. Then you have to do something else. And then once you got the money, then you can come back to do what you really want to do too. We do that all the time at PDX Farm. And then we improve the data, and then we go back to the investor or funder again.
Yeah, nothing like validation of an idea to get money in the door.
Oh, your investors will give you lots of no-goes. Just get ready. You got to be the one that has
more than go.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, we have more questions, but we're at the end of time and need to go out into our breakout rooms. But I'm happy you guys have inspired a lot of questions here. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate that, and look forward to letting you know how things go for these new entrepreneurs on their way.
Thanks so much, Terry. And just want to, again, thank the panelists for participating. Really appreciate it. It's important, and I know folks appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.